And now we have Cybersecurity Avin with Bryson Bort. Welcome, Bryson.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, do I get to start 5 minutes early?
Yeah, let's do it.
Oh, all right. It's like, I'm supposed to go out in 5 more minutes. Let's do this. Hold on. Swig of courage. And let's get those slides up. Share screen.
Feel free to take more sips if you need time.
And my slides are seen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. All right. Cybersecurity Avin. Because why shouldn't we drink while we do cybersecurity? All right. Who am I? I founded a few companies. I founded Grim a little bit more than 8 years ago, consultancy. Started off as an army of one. We worked our way up to a lot more than that now. We also have our own conference, which is part of where I feel a particular affinity with PancakesCon, because both Leslie and I saw the need to really reach out and help the rest of the community when everything was getting kind of swirly back a year ago. So really feel the kindred spirit there. Spun a product startup out of that called Scythe, which is an adversary emulation platform. And then I co-founded the nonprofit, the ICS Village. And then I do a bunch of unicorn shenanigans. All right, so goals for today. 1, reduce the haystack. This is why we're going to be talking about logging and detection engineering, because we are always looking for the needles in that haystack. Sometimes there's not a needle, but the problem is that haystack is really big. So goal 1 for this talk is we're going to try to give a brief overview on how to reduce the size of the haystack. Goal number 2, we're going to eat well. So it's Women's History Month, month of March, and we're going to celebrate Julia Child, who was very famous in bringing French cuisine to the United States. And her signature dish that started that was coq au vin. All right, so metrics. Metrics go along this maturity model from logging. Can I even see it? All the way through to being able to alert on that, which is a level of starting to bring human interaction because we're establishing correlation of events, putting it into the business terms. I note 11060 here. This concept is from Dmitry Operovich from a few years ago. He notes this as this is the amount of time for detection, investigation, and response remediation that we need to do to be able to effectively contain an adversary from their breakout time. Now, I note those as goals because those are really challenging to hit those. More importantly, is just getting the maturity to start to be able to measure them will help us along that path. And then starting to turn that into a contextual, and continuous obviously is a phrase of, while things cannot be continuously done, that we can get more from snapshots to those snapshots being like calculus where it averages over time and we can get much better insight. Paul Melson, one of those great Illuminati in cybersecurity. The truth is detecting threats is easy. Identifying threats is hard. And what he's saying here is that this is the haystack. We can build to the point where we're capturing everything, but then being able to sift through that in a timely and effective manner is the hard part, because that's where the threat is. When is a screenshot not just a screenshot? We take screenshots all day long. The context of a screenshot being, this is me doing something for me, and this is a malicious actor who's using it to steal credentials. That context is what makes detection so hard when it comes to correlating that to an event where we want to bring somebody because something is suspicious. So at the top, I simplify the attack chain into 3 elements: recon, access, post-access. I want to case the joint, I want to break into the joint, I want to steal the jewels. Correlate that to the cyber defense matrix. If you haven't heard about Sunil Yu is one of the smartest people in cybersecurity, bar none. He's amazing. And he came up with this concept a few years ago at RSA called the cyber defense matrix, where he splits the phases of a defender from identify, what do I got? 80% of cybersecurity is configuration management. Do I even know what I have? Into protecting, denying access, detecting, responding, and recovering across the categories of assets in our company, which not only include the technical, but also the people. And so the key here is why detection is so valuable is it's the part that we can control. We have limited ability and there's limited business value in being able to affect what can be seen about me and denying an attacker. The perimeter is dead. The detection aspect is what do we do afterward? Every attacker has to be visible at some level afterward. And what are the things in our control that we can do that? And it starts with establishing, again, what can we see, correlating that, and starting to go to more advanced analytics. So why are we doing this? First of all, lots of tools. Something like 50% of all tools in aggregate are either bought and not installed, or they're just installed with the default configuration. We're talking about security tools here. Well, none of those are going to work. They're not going to detect anything. No matter what the vendor tells you, and this is where I think the snake oil comment about vendors is not quite fair, is most of the time a vendor has sold you a correct bill of goods. The challenge is it has to be put into your context. We need to take what this can do and tune it for you. And so that's what we're going to provide an overview here on how to do that. Threat intelligence is primarily stale IOCs and signature-driven approaches. We all know the pyramid of pain. I think it's mandatory that we say two things in every presentation. We talk about David Bianco's pyramid of pain, and we give a call out to MITRE's attack framework. The problem is that we are still primarily stuck at the bottom of discovering yesterday to detect tomorrow. And the reality is we're always going to be behind on that. One of the things that we're going to talk about today that is going to provide very rich insight is Sysmon. Microsoft is the largest surface area in enterprise IT. Microsoft has done a phenomenal job with their security program, but they are the largest target. Almost everybody uses them. There are very few environments that don't have Microsoft. Sysmon is a fantastic and most importantly, free tool to help us do that. So we're going to go from not just being able to see, but to provide context to it. And part of that is because attackers are always changing. Payloads can be polymorphic. They're looking and understanding that signatures are what you're looking for. So that's something that they're moving beyond. Impash defeats. So the way that we signature in an environment, they can defeat that. And then we always see this ability for them to take derivatives, where a successful tool set payload will be derived from, built upon, and fork out in different directions. So one, doing this, you will get an immediate return on implementing these detections. It will save you time. This is the biggest thing because we're all so busy. There aren't enough of us and there's more than enough work and we're always behind the curve. While this seems like a little bit of extra effort to begin with, I promise you it will pay dividends in saving you time in the long run. And I also want to call out in OWASP that one of their top 10 is insufficient logging and monitoring. I didn't mention this at the beginning, but you'll notice here that this is underlined. So all of my slides, I will have URLs to sources. I will have URLs to more information. And I will share the slides after this presentation. I will also be in the PancakesCon Slack afterward to answer questions. And then I have an entire resource section with all sorts of a lot more information because I can only cover so much in 20 so minutes. And with that, you can take what you want and go a deep dive even further with what I'm sharing here today. If you haven't heard about Detect, Detect is this alternate perspective of attack based on the fact that the blue team needs its own method for looking at data sources to establish visibility into detection. I have the link in here, so feel free to check that out for more. All right, so our starting problem, especially with Windows logs, is the event logs suck. There's just not a lot of data to work with. So when we look at the foundation of a building that we're trying to take up to a skyscraper, it's really hard to build this with the default event logs that exist. I have a snapshot in here because I can't go back and forth between VMs in my kitchen in enough time here. So you can kind of see looking in here, there's a basic amount of information in your average Windows event log, but there's not a lot to work from. So we need higher fidelity logging. One of the first things that you can do is there's some edits inside Windows, so in group policy and administrative templates that can enrich those data sources so we can capture even more information. And then there's Sysmon. So if you haven't heard about Sysmon is awesome. It provides rich, detailed information on the host. You'll note here, this is 13.01. This is the latest version. The reason I took a snapshot here is to show that they're still maintaining and keeping this up. So here we are, the last one was in January. The additional element that they added, so the way that Sysmon works is it has event IDs. The last one that they added is number 25, which allows you to detect process hollowing. I mean, that's pretty cool. So why? First of all, it's free. Again, we love free. Free is a great starting point. It's lightweight and it's native. This isn't yet another third-party driver that you're trying to install that's going to constantly break every time that Microsoft is pushing out a patch or an update. It has tons of logs to build custom detections. This is a great tool to start with and then to be able to tune. It's really easy to tune. It has a very flexible language. It allows you to be selective about what's interesting you and to eliminate noise. In the resource section, I'm going to post the links to two really great Sysmon configurations, one from one of the smartest guys I know in the detection space, that's Olaf Hartong, called Sysmon Modular, and then of course Swift on Security. There's some differences between the two. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through those, but the point is, those are great starting points. And even with those, they're a tuned element to capture a certain amount, but these are going to be generating a certain amount of data. And what is of interest to you is something that you want to take that next step, but those are great starting points. There we go. All right, so some best practices. Make sure you're archiving your Sysmon files versions. Microsoft does not make previous versions available. So going back to, again, configuration management for assets, you're going to want to apply configuration management for Sysmon so that you know exactly what it's doing for that logging. 10.0 is different than 13.0. And knowing that there are different versions and your ability to track that for what you're using in your enterprise is going to be important. It's going to be on you. As a part of your install and upgrade script, you're going to make sure that you want to be checking that version so that you're doing what you want to do. All right, some install options. So just real quick, yeah, we'll just say that. But one of the cool things I thought about this is that you can obfuscate Sysmon. So as somebody who has always been on the offensive security side for his career, the attacker is really good at being able to turn whatever is static in a defense into our test matrix. We take that down, we reverse engineer it, and we test what we're going to do before we go into your environment. Obfuscating Sysmon is just one of those things that adds a little bit of an extra mix, right? I don't know that you're using Sysmon. I know it when I do an enumeration of a host and I see sysmon.drv loaded. On the other hand, if it's called something else, then that's not going to be necessarily as apparent. It takes an extra step for me to learn this. So just a little extra hint there that being able to obfuscate this is something that adds a little bit more difficulty and provides assurance that your eyes will be still there and able to work to track what you want, although it does have an 8-character limit. So once we load Sysmon, I'm a big fan of check your work as you go. So we can see that Sysmon is running here in events. Sysmon logs, if you remember just a few minutes ago, we were showing the Windows event log and how Windows event log was not as rich in information. Here in Sysmon, we get a whole bunch more information that we can pull out. In this example, specifically, we're looking at event ID 1, which is process creation. So we're now tracking down to specific events that are happening on the host and a level of rich data that is coming with each one of those events. And so it's already easier to splice our data. Now, of course, we need some way to be able to ingest and analyze this data. One of the most popular tools out there is ELK, which stands for Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. It's free, it's open source. I note that everything has a price. And part of that price is going to come with the fact that ELK is powerful, but ELK can start to get difficult to use in certain circumstances and can be a little touchy. But for a starting point, this is a great thing to work with in a lab because it's free and it's open source. It's the kind of thing that you can build and tune and deploy to an environment to get you going. But out of the gate, we're getting centralized, scalable data store for us to do analysis, which is key for us to do that detection engineering. So we've got something like Sysbon, which is enriching our logging at the source. We're going to use something like beats, in this case, WinLog beats, to pipe that information into a centralized data store. So we have all of our endpoints combining that information. Now we have this ability to splice this data any way that we want. And then Kibana is there for us to be able to visualize this, so it's a lot easier to look at. So I talked about WinLog beat. WinLog beat is how we're getting the information off the system. Really easy to install with administrator privilege PowerShell, running the script, reconfiguring the YML file. Make sure to check your configuration. There is, in my resource section, there is a command to be able to check your configuration to make sure that it's kosher. I will give the warning that this is very space sensitive. So the configuration file requires everything to be exactly where it's looking for it, even one space off, and it won't parse correctly. Restart Sysbon, restart WinLog beat, and just for note, as you're going through the installation, a pro tip, rename the installation directory for ease of use. What I mean by that is when you unpack the initial zip, it's going to come out with this really long directory title, including with dashes. And of course, if you're working in Linux, that can be a little tricky. So just simplify it. All right, something else to consider is that with Sysbon, you're going to want to have different configurations for different assets. What you're looking for on a server is going to be different than what you're looking on a user host, and then whatever asset categories that you have. Going back to that comment about configuration management, this is where this starts to get sticky. Not only can there be different versions of the Sysbon driver working in our environment, there can also be different configurations of what Sysbon is doing on different hosts. So being able to track all of that is going to be really critical for us. All right, so some final thoughts. Make sure that you're testing first in a lab. So working very simply, building it up, making sure that when you go to a production environment, you're not overwhelming yourself. At the end of the day, our goal is to reduce the size of the haystack, not just add all of the data to begin with. So visibility is great. We want to reduce that visibility over time. Elk is resource hungry. You're going to need a lot of RAM. Storage gets really big, really fast. So this is part of what you want to see in your environment is when you're testing, how much am I generating per host with average traffic? And what's really happening in the environment can shift that. So on average, you can expect a host to probably take anywhere from like 10 to at a top, maybe 40 or 50 megabytes per day. As I said here, that can add up real fast. And then on the other side is data retention. As we well know, it usually takes some time to be able to find a breach afterward. So the amount of data that we have for as long as we can have that data, that's what helps us look back historically to identify that first point. So data retention is a challenge here because you're always going to be in this balance of course, I want as much as possible versus the cost of maintaining that. Almost all of these platforms, there is a cloud element to it, which of course they will happily charge you more to keep things longer. And then again, we talked about the challenges around configuration management. So something you want to plan for up front. All right, if you don't know this, CyberWarDog created a packaged version of Elk called Helk. Helk is a very, very easy way to get started in a lab. You just do a git clone, you pull down from the link. I have the email, excuse me, I have the URL here. So you can go through that. He has a bunch of instructions. The only advice that I would give here is make sure you're starting from a clean Linux install. This is the kind of thing where you're working with somebody else's package. Dependencies that are not anticipated can break things. This is a great start to getting something in a lab and getting going, and all the visualizations and all the indexing is already built in there. One of the other things that he includes for you is our Sigma rules. So Sigma rules are YAML files that are a way to share the way logging is described. And so I just have some snapshots here where you can look inside of the Helk distro and actually see where he has already built in, in this case, for example, PowerShell detection and LSASS here for event ID 10. Right, I also forgot that he also included automatically tagging all of these events into the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So out of the box, you're already getting a pretty mature perspective on being able to how to index and analyze the data. There's links. Okay. There's always a but. One of the other ones is SoftElk, which is created by the great folks over at SANS. I've always talked about context. I started this talking about context. These are great tools. Just like the fact that we have security tools, your analytic tools need to be geared toward your environment and what works for you. So these are awesome things, but if you were just to deploy them into your environment, when we get to that data storage and retention problem, right? Something that works well for 1 machine or 10 machines or 100 machines might not scale as easily if you have a large environment of 10,000 plus machines or 100,000 plus machines. So being able to really look at a fine-tuned perspective of what's important to you based on the natural activities that are in your environment and how much data that's creating is key before you just push it into production. All right, so one of the ways to do that is we need to create a functional signal. And this is what the red team does, is finding a way to establish context by using APT grouping or adversary emulation to drive that. So my setup here, we're going to have an attack server going after a Windows target with a Linux box with Helk, pulling that information. Again, this is where Logbeats comes in and conducting the analysis. What you're using to attack can be anything. So if you haven't heard about the C2 matrix, the C2 matrix is a project that I worked out with George Orchias and Adam Ashinchi over at Red Canary, where we just built the largest compendium of all of the C2 tools that are available. Some of them are commercial, most of them are free and open source. We have over 60 C2 platforms in there. There's a decision tool that allows you to go in and say, well, what am I trying to test? And it'll automatically spin that up. One of the things that George did in collaboration with the SANS Institute was create a Linux VM called SANS Slingshot that has a number of those free C2 platforms already built and installed for you. So that's a great resource to start to work, again, for free, to drive the detection engineering for you. All right, so what we're doing here is start basic. So in this case, we're creating a basic payload. What we're trying to do is through user execution using run DLL 32. If you're not familiar with LOLBAS, LOLBAS is the fact that there are a number of binaries that have already been seen as benign. So they're allowed listed in the environment. Attackers love those because those are a great way for us to use those to spawn our own processes because the operating system is going to think it's okay. We get in, we get started, and then we establish our command and control. I recommend something like HTTPS to start. HTTPS is, I believe, about 60 to 70% of all attacks, the most common protocol that we see. It's a little bit harder than HTTP, of course, because it's encrypted. And so this forces you to look at what you're able to do in terms of either are you intercepting certificates or are you looking at the metadata to establish network traffic activity back to host activity to correlate that context to understanding an attacker. Doing something really simple, again, running Who Am I? If you haven't played our Red Team arcade game that was created by Tim Malcolmvetter, over the Red Team lead over at Fortune 1, as he likes to describe, Who Am I is a very benign request. But is it? How many users even know what Who Am I is, right? If we were to look at our entire group, chances are there's a very select group that would even know what that is, which means it would be very suspicious for anybody to run that. And even those that are authorized to run it, seeing that they are is a questionable thing. Attackers don't know where they start. They basically come into an environment blind. Who am I is a great starting point of like, all right, well, like, what host am I on? What does this mean in the network that I first started at? So it's a good basic step to begin to see what I could log and start establishing that correlation of what that means in our environment. And then we're executing a PowerShell payload from Windows Registry because most malware today is fileless. It resides in memory only. The days of things going and touching disk immediately are pretty much gone because, of course, that's a lot easier to work with. Something that touches with disk creates a forensic artifact that I can begin to track and work with. So attackers know this, and being able to conduct forensics analysis and understanding in memory is a much harder problem. And this is a good baseline to kind of get started with what's important. And of course, you're going to want to work through the LOLBAS of different ways to start these invocations. There are many different communication protocols besides HTTPS. And then, of course, there are a lot of benign commands that we can run from the command line that we want to be able to take a look at what those mean. And then from there, we start graduating ourselves up to more complex APTs to emulate to understand what would happen against a stealthier and more difficult adversary. So from the Who Am I, for example, we're going to go into Kibana. We can see that by looking at that, what kinds of things we've seen, and start to build those correlations for that. Another free tool that I'm a big fan of is Vector. So we can import in Vector those TTPs that we ran from that campaign. Of course, this is pretty simple. And now we have it gives us a few things. It is a good process flow for red and blue to work together to determine what was detected at what points. And it gives us those simple metrics of understanding detection percentages. So we didn't detect anything as a baseline. All right, well, let's install Sysmon. Let's enable event ID with process creation. So we're detecting these kinds of the creation of those executables, run it again, and we can start to see improvements in our visibility. So really simple, easy overview of detection engineering. To get to 9,000 on your own, continue testing. So that snapshot is showing the basics of where we began. But if I've seen anything about security in my career, security is a constant fight against gravity. Whatever worked today, at some point, will break. And our ability to continue to make sure that the work that we put in to achieve this level is maintained means we need to continue to check those baselines. The good part is, from a people, process, and technology side of doing this, it gets faster and it gets easier. And so as you continue to build the plateaus through more mature detection engineering, validating that you haven't lost ground is what helps you continue to that momentum to better security. As you can see, this was primarily host level focused. You want to add the network level of this. So it's that combination, not just of isolated host incidents, but starting to look at host activities or hosts activities tied to specific network detections that is going to take this to another level. A great example of this is SolarWinds, right? So everybody's been talking about that for months now, and why not? Let's talk about it a little bit more. One of the weaknesses of SolarWinds, and this is the challenge for most adversaries, is while their initial bounce points are going to be as close as possible to the host, and typically they're going to be cloud hosted in the United States, the end adversary is not. Last time I checked, I haven't seen the GRU or SVD set up around here. They're still somewhere else. And so one of the ways that you can look at network traffic to identify these things is that initial call to what's probably looks like a benign host. There is a longer round trip than would be expected for a response, because that's just an initial bounce node as it goes through its C2 network back to the C2 host. And so that longer amount of time is a giveaway at the network level that something is a little odd happening. We talked about increasing the sophistication level. And then in terms of leveraging adversary emulation plans, this is something that we do and share freely. So go check it out on our GitHub. It's just JSONs where we break down the latest threats that we're seeing into TTPs. And then, of course, MITRE ATT&CK is the golden resource for a lot of that group intel and insights. And there are a lot of other folks that do a lot of great work on this. So just look for those sources that are out there. They're all free, and pull it together and share with the community as we go. All right, so moving on to the cooking part. We talked about that security is best with wine. So is cooking. And since it's Women's History Month, we're going to talk about one of the great female chefs of all time, and that is Julia Child. Julia Child was one of the first to help bring French cuisine to the United States. She did this co-writing a book called Mastering the Art of French Cooking, which was released in 1961. And then in 1963 on PBS, she went on to create her own cooking show called The French Chef, which went on for about a decade. Now, the thing about this is that, one, wine should be involved. And two, people hear French cooking and go, whoa, that sounds hard. I don't want to do that. We're going to make it easy. We've got 20 minutes, and we're going to walk through the basics of making an awesome, almost the first one-pot meal, which is coq au vin. I'm a big fan of one pots because I don't like to clean as much as I need. You know, I keep the cleaning simple. Excuse me. All right. So coq au vin translates directly as rooster and wine, of course, chicken. Really simple. Render bacon, brown the chicken, skin side down, saute onions, garlic, and whatever savories we want to add. What's a savory? Thyme, rosemary, sage, savory herbs. Combine with chicken stock and cover. Let that sit for a while. Add mushrooms and carrots. Whisk in some flour to thicken up the sauce. Let it sit for as long as you want. And that's it. This is that easy. So one of the things I like about this dish is it can go with a lot of different things. You can use different kinds of wine, and it gets better over time. So I started this morning. See, it's over there. Oh, there we go. See, it's over there, the red pot going. Just to make it easier, because trying to cook and do all of this in this condensed time period is difficult, just like I wasn't showing VMs, I did snapshots. So we're going to do the same thing for the food. All right, step 0. Pour some wine. Cheers. Quick shout out to this knife. This is a custom santoku that Blenster's father made for me. You can actually see his name is engraved on it. So I've tried to highlight this whenever possible, and I know on Blenster's Twitter, he has some additional knives that he's highlighting right now. So go check those out. They are well made. All right, step 1, render the bacon. So what we're doing here is we are pulling the fat, the grease out of the bacon. Traditional French cooking has lots of butter. I actually didn't use any butter in this recipe because of the approach that I did with both the bacon and the chicken. Is I used the natural fat that's in both of those to form the base to cook for this. The Holy Trinity is garlic, onion, and a fat. Cooking with that will achieve just unbelievable results. So once we've rendered this out, so you can see here, we've got the oil here in the pan. The pan, you want it to be a pot that's large enough, because this is kind of, this is like a large stew. If you start with something too small, you're going to have a hard time. Always start with a bigger pot that you need, and you'll find that more often than not, you fill it all the way up. After we've rendered our bacon, we pull it out, let it sit, then brown the chicken. So 2 things here. Americans tend to like chicken breasts without the skin. It's just an easy chicken to work with, and that will work for this. The difference being is you're not going to want to brown it the same way. You can kiss it on both sides to make it easier to chop, but at the end of the day, for that, I recommend just chopping it and throwing it in, because once you get it into a stew, everything just cooks out. I really like chicken thighs with the skin on. This is the same thing for duck. Cook it skin side down. That fat will pull out of the skin, you get a really, really nice crisp brown. Did I have any? No, I didn't. Sorry, I meant to include a picture of the brown skin. It gets this really, really pretty golden brown color on the skin. We'll see it when I plate it. And so we're pulling that out. The other thing I wanted to talk about here is, so these cuts of meat are also not as expensive because they're not as popular. So for example, the leg quarters that I got here, which are the thigh with the drumstick attached, I think were like 79 cents a pound. And the trick to cutting the meat up is you just come at an angle about where the joint is, and you just come in at a diagonal, and the two will split apart like that. So this is something else I think a lot of people are a little intimidated by cutting this. And you can see it's actually not that hard. It takes a little bit of practice, but a good sturdy knife, that right angle cut, and it comes right apart. And we've got our chicken all ready for us. Why pay somebody else to do it? We can do it ourselves. Then we saute. So I am a huge fan of what I call the rustic cut. Mincing onions, there are some techniques to mince onions really easily. Same thing with garlic. How I did this, I did a rough chop of the onions. I did a rough chop of my fennel. And the garlic, I actually threw in whole cloves of the garlic, because when it cooks this long, the garlic just achieves this perfect consistency, and you wouldn't even mind getting a whole bite of it. It's not like the really pungent garlic bite that you get. It's actually a lot of this like sort of sophisticated garlic, more like sophisticated umami of like sweetness. So using a whole garlic is not a problem. Trick question, how much garlic is too much garlic? There is never enough. I believe Julia's original recipe called for 4 cloves with several pounds of chicken. I think I probably have about 16 cloves in here. Bonus, you keep the vampires away. One of the other things that I like to do that's a neat trick is thyme. So with thyme, so this is out of my garden, is the easy way to strip thyme is you just hold it and you just pull it down, and those leaves will come right off. However, I really like the extra flavor that comes with the fact that I've been letting this braise for several hours. So I throw the whole thing in there with the leaves still on. It's really easy to pull them out, and I feel like you just get a little bit extra flavor from using the entire herb. All right, so after we've cooked so that our garlic, our onion, and our fennel has kind of opened up, deglaze the pan. So we're going to still have from earlier when we browned our chicken. Actually, you can see some of the really pretty browning on the top there of the chicken. And sometimes the skin gets pulled off a little bit. It's cooking. Just doesn't have to be perfect. Pour the wine in, scrape those bits off, pour a little bit more wine in, scrape the bits off, let it cook for a little bit. And then we're going to throw everything in here. So tear the bacon back up, throw it in here, pour more wine, chicken stock, and then the mushrooms, the carrots, whatever else you want to throw in there. One of the other things that could be good in here is celery. And this is the best part then, is we just cover the pot and we let it sit. So my pot has been sitting now for almost 3 hours. So this would be the part where you get to sit back in your kitchen and just have a drink, smile at the family. And while we're waiting to do that, we're going to talk a little bit about some wine. So wine. Wine is one of those things that I think people have kind of built up a bit more of it, just like French cuisine. We think it's so fancy and we build all of it up, when actually the French were some of the best at just, hey, this is what I got available. Let's throw it together. Let's cook it for a long time, a lot of fat, and we're done. That's pretty much French cuisine. Wine is kind of the same thing. Well, not the same thing in that way, but metaphorically the same thing, where what we're doing is it's meant to help bring a group together. And I know that's hard in the pandemic, but I've got some tricks here so I'm a household of one adult, where a bottle of wine, I will show you a trick on how that you don't have to try to drink it all in a night, because that's not good, as well as using it in the cooking like we've been doing. So the temperature of wine matters. If you have watched my Don't Fight Your Whiskey talk at PancakesCon, the temperature of a liquid is going to change how your taste buds react to it. And I think the most common misconception is reds should also be chilled slightly. And the way to achieve that is throw your red in the fridge, and then about 10 to 15 minutes before you take it out, take it out in advance. And so it just comes down to closer to room temperature than just what's there, slightly a little bit chilled. With the red, you're going to want to let it sit for a little bit, let it breathe. I think pour it into whatever can hold it and drink it. It's all going to work out. So these are officially the ways to select your glassware, but don't worry too much about it. None of these are hard rules. So again, drink what you like. Anything over 10 bottles, it's going to be, over $10. Anything over 10 bottles, you'll be more than okay. Anything over $10 a bottle, you're going to be good. Boxed wine actually can be pretty good. So the stereotype of boxed wine is we think of like the $2 Chuck or like Frangea. Yeah, those are not great wines. But there has actually been a lot of work over the last about decade and a half of some pretty good wines that come in boxes. And the advantage there is we don't have to wrestle with the wine going bad. Wine oxidizes as it's open. So it's not the kind of thing you can leave open overnight. Boxed wine solves some of that. Easy way to think about pairing. Red goes with anything red, white with pretty much everything else. And then one of the other tricks that I've personally used is I save the cork tops from my whiskey bottles. And I have found that just by creating a collection of them, I'm always going to have one that will just easily stopper a bottle of wine. So with wine, it's about the story. So the wine we're drinking today is a Paso Robles. The story behind this particular one, so Paso Robles is actually in California, but this blend here was inspired by the delightful wines from the south of France and Spain, a combination of well-known varieties from the old world. So on one hand, you can say, all right, that's a bit much, but that story kind of ties into what we're making here. This is a traditionally French dish. There's a little bit of a story to this. It can be a little fun. And then, of course, the stories you make with the wine. Again, I look forward to a post-pandemic world where we can sit around with a bottle and learn from each other. So I paired my coq au vin with a parsnip mash. I picked parsnips just to introduce us something a little bit different. It's a root vegetable. Just have to peel it, dice it. Again, I don't have to be too particular. Dice it roughly, boil it, drain it, and then just like baking mashed potatoes, add what you want. So in this case, all I did was butter, salt, and pepper. I didn't add anything else because the juices that have been working here for hours are going to provide most of the flavor. And the parsnip is just something there that's going to catch all of it. I've been doing my own cooking show for about a year. I've had a number of guests on. Our goals are make the kitchen accessible so it's easier for everybody else to cook, raise money for good causes, and have fun while we're doing it. Where every Wednesday, we try to publish the recipes about a week in advance. Each guest chef picks their own recipe, so feel free to join us. And for those of you who are interested in coming on the show, shoot me a note. All right, so let's put it all together. First, I'm going to start with some parsnip mash. That's going to be our base. Then that looks awesome. All right. So one of the things I like about cooking is you can taste and adjust as you go. So before you serve, you can always go light on the salt because you can add more salt, but it's kind of hard to take it away. There we go. Make sure we get some more. All right. And then we're going to dress ours up. So I kept some of the fronds from the top of the fennel. Just see that there. We're going to just dress that up over it. And voila, chicken coq au vin. And I managed to do all that with 4 minutes to spare, although to be fair, I did start 5 minutes early. So I'm happy to take questions. I will be in the Slack for a little bit afterward to answer questions. And again, I will share all of my slides. So all of the resources, including the full recipe list for coq au vin, and the links and details and the whole resource section for all the detection engineering. Leslie and all the amazing staff here, thank you so much for hosting me at PancakesCon 2.
That was amazing, Bryson. Thank you so much. I think everyone's starving now, regardless of what time of day it is or evening.
Oh, I haven't taken a bite yet. Yeah. Any questions while I take a bite?
How does it taste?
Yeah. It's...
Yes, we have questions.
Oh, the chicken just like melts right off the bone.
Oh no.
Yeah. What's the question?
Yeah. Sorry. It's freezing. Will you have a place where you also add handouts as well following this, not just like the PowerPoint, but...
handouts?
Yeah.
What do you mean by handouts?
I guess they mean like PDFs or something they could follow along with.
I mean, the PowerPoint will be, I'll put it on SlideShare. So I mean, you'll be able to access it through a website. Perfect.
In your opinion, do you think Sysmon is necessarily easy for everyone, or is there some work that needs to be done to tune it for each org?
So yeah, Sysmon is easy to install. Sysmon is easy to configure. Sysmon is going to be generating, this is where I was talking about the challenge with data storage and retention. Based on how you tune it, you can overwhelm yourself with too much data. So tuning it to what matters to you versus, like, for example, the last time I was looking at the Sysmon configs between Swift and Olaf, Swift was not capturing like LSAS. And that's an example of, okay, you know what, that's something where that's a common process on an operating system that's getting invoked, so it can generate a lot of data. On the other hand, that leaves you open to the fact that that could be used as a LOLBAS injection point.
Excellent, thanks. And then you mentioned using that on user hosts. Is sending logs to a centralized host something that can be achieved with everyone working from home, and also what ways could that be done?
Yeah, so you can have, so the challenge usually with more of a remote workforce is that that host is not always on. And so you can have it where it's stored locally and then it's forwarded when that connection is there. But I mean, other than that, it's a corporate asset that's going to be VPNing in just like any other asset. I mean, the difference is just that VPN versus it being locally present.
And lastly, what is your ratio of wine to chicken stock?
Great question. So the thing about cooking, and you'll notice this when I publish the recipe, is I'm not a fan of giving like real particular amounts, because I really think each chef kind of should tune it to themselves. But I aim for about a cup of wine to about 2 to 3 cups of chicken stock is how I did this. You want enough where you are cooking and adding flavor. It helps to keep the chicken on top there, so you can still benefit from the skin staying a little crispy. And the harder part really is figuring out the right amount of flour to thicken the sauce to the right level. And that's just something where add a little bit, add a little bit, add a little bit. And you want to do that anyway, otherwise your flour is going to clump.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This was amazing. I know I'm starving. There's some more questions in the chat, so I'll let you answer those. For example, can you store snacks in your beard? But save it for the chat, and we will see you there. Thanks, Bryson.
See you on Slack.